Okay, let's unpack this.
We are diving deep today into a story of corporate self-destruction, but in the best possible sense.
Right.
We're analyzing a company whose entire history, really since 1999, is a masterclass in aggressive, focused reinvention. This company systematically shed assets worth billions. I mean, they essentially tore down their foundational identity
Just ripped it out.
completely, only to rebuild itself into this highly specialized titan. We
Yeah.
were talking, of course, about Agilent Technologies.
And when you look at Agilent today, they're the indispensable nameplate in any high-end laboratory. They provide the sophisticated instruments, the diagnostics, the stuff that underpins life sciences, advanced clinical research, and chemical analysis, globally.
Hmm.
But the fact that they're here, that they're dominating this niche, is borderline miraculous given where they started. They began as this sprawling conglomerate, the non-computing half of a true Silicon Valley legend.
That transformation is. It's just so radical. And it wasn't a smooth transition, not by a long shot. It was a decades-long strategic gamble,
Yeah.
punctuated by economic downturns and some really ruthless prioritization.
So that's our mission for you today. We want to understand the precise strategic how and why behind this evolution. We're using a really comprehensive source stack, covering Agilent's history, their financials, all the big strategic moves. And we're really zeroing in on those crucial 2 decades between the dot-com era and today.
Yeah, and what we're really trying to uncover is the core insight of this entire journey. It's the aha moment, right?
Exactly. How did a company that was dealing primarily in, electronic components, communications, testing equipment, and very traditional medical devices, how did they end up pioneering target enrichment for next-generation sequencing?
Or advanced cancer diagnostics, or even manufacturing nucleic acid-based therapeutics.
It's not just a pivot. That word is too small. It's a total corporate metamorphosis, and we are going to trace every single step that made it successful.
To really appreciate the scale of Agilent's later strategic cuts, you first have to understand the deep, long-standing roots of the businesses they were born from, the businesses inside Hewlett-Packard. This scientific and analytical focus, it wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't something they just tacked on. It was a deeply ingrained part of the original HP DNA.
It's truly remarkable how far back this foundation goes. You have to rewind all the way to 1965. HP, already a computing powerhouse, makes this strategic move into scientific equipment. They acquire a company called F&M Scientific.
And F&M, they weren't a household name, but they were a small but crucial player. Specifically, they were a maker of gas chromatographs.
And for anyone who's not a chemist, what exactly is that?
Think of it as a superpowered nose. It's a core analytical tool used for separating and analyzing compounds in a sample. You inject a liquid or gas and tells you exactly what's inside and how much. It's fundamental to everything from environmental testing to food safety.
So that 1965 acquisition, that's the quiet moment that seeds the entire future.
That's it. That single move laid the foundational groundwork for Agilent's eventual hyper-focused identity in chemical analysis decades later. It was a strategic asset, but, one that was often overshadowed by HP's massive computing and printing divisions.
Right, because that's what everyone knew HP for, printers and calculators.
Exactly. And the non-computing businesses they inherited weren't just add-ons. They were the original sinews of the company. You have to consider the HP Medical Products division.
Okay.
That had been acquired way back in the 1950s. That made it the second oldest operating part of the entire Hewlett-Packard company. These were not peripheral businesses. They were integral, decades-old groups that really defined the breadth of the original HP mission.
So this history is key then. It highlights the cultural conflict that was brewing and eventually led to the split.
100%. By the late 1990s, HP was massive, just enormous. It was a printer company, a server company, a medical device company, and a lab equipment company, all under one roof.
And you can't manage those the same way, can you?
You can't. Trying to manage the high-volume, quick-turnaround PC market alongside the long-cycle, high-precision, PhD-driven scientific instrument market, it created this untenable friction. The cultures were just too different.
And that friction brings us directly to 1999 and the necessity of the spinoff. It wasn't really a philosophical choice to streamline, was it? The market was basically demanding it.
Absolutely. The source material is quite explicit about this. The split was driven by competitive pressure. The sheer size, the bureaucracy, the diversity of HP, it had become a drag on innovation and speed.
And they were getting flanked by smaller players.
Exactly. They needed to compete with these smaller, more agile competitors who were focused on single markets and could move much, much faster. The decision was born from the difficulty HP faced in growing its core revenue while trying to stay competitive across so many different sectors.
The old conglomerate model was failing.
It was failing in the face of rapid, specialized technological change. It just couldn't keep up.
It's almost poetic that the reason for the spinoff, this need for agility, was immediately codified into the new company's identity.
It really is. They were smart about it. They retained the strong culture of their parent, the HP way, which was all about engineering excellence and integrity.
And they launched Agilent with that slogan, innovating the HP way.
Yeah, they were basically saying, we'll keep the pedigree, we'll keep the engineering chops, but we're going to apply it with speed.
The branding reinforced this focus too. The name Agilent was explicitly chosen to invoke agility.
Right, the exact quality they were trying to recover. And the famous Starburst logo, that was selected to reflect a burst of insight or a spark of insight. They weren't just launching a new company, they were launching a mindset, one that valued speed and specialized engineering knowledge over sheer market breadth.
So let's be really clear about what Agilent was at birth. It was not the focused life science company we know today. If you were an investor buying into that IPO in 1999, what was the actual scope of your investment? What were you buying?
You were still buying a huge company. The original Agilent included those scientific instrumentation and chemical analysis groups, yes, but it was still deeply, deeply involved in the electronics world.
Okay, like what?
You were buying test and measurement equipment for electronics. You were buying optics, so LED and laser technology. You were buying electronic components. And critically, you were buying that vast, revenue-heavy medical equipment division that handled things like patient monitoring devices in hospitals.
So it was really a beast, an industrial measurement and analysis conglomerate.
That's the perfect term for it.
Yet despite this still sprawling portfolio, the market responded with massive confidence. They loved the promise of a leaner, more focused future.
They did. The initial public offering was monumental. It raised $2.1 billion,
Wow.
which set a record for the largest IPO in Silicon Valley history at the time. This just underscores the initial belief that the HP brand, combined with the promise of agility, was enough to command a huge premium. The market was essentially giving them a vote of confidence to go out and make the tough decisions they needed to make.
But let's pause on that IPO confidence for a second. Was that a true vote of confidence in the long-term strategy of scientific specialization? Or was it just, reflecting the massive brand recognition and the perceived stability of the HP lineage during the tail end of the dot-com boom?
That's a critical distinction, and I think you're right. The confidence was likely vested in the HP brand and the quality of the assets, not necessarily the specific long-term strategy.
Because that strategy hadn't even been fully defined yet.
Not at all. It was still a work in progress.
Right.
And that confidence, well, it would be severely tested almost immediately. If you look at the portfolio they took public, it was dangerously exposed to the very markets that were about to collapse.
Semiconductors and communications.
The heart of the dot-com bubble. They were a successful company, but they were born into exactly the wrong economic moment.
So Section 2 is where the high-stakes drama really begins. Right after this record-setting IPO, the early 2000s economic turbulence hits. This period was the crucible that forced Agilent to make the brutal strategic cuts they needed to survive and ultimately to find their true identity.
The economic downturn created an instantaneous forcing function. It was a trial by fire. Agilent, especially through its electronics and communications testing divisions, was heavily exposed to the collapsing tech markets.
Just completely over-leveraged in that area.
Totally. The economic uncertainty severely depressed demand, and the company was hit with a staggering $500 million in canceled orders.
$500 million.
$500 million in canceled orders, particularly in the communications and semiconductor sectors. That's not just a hiccup. It's a near-fatal shockwave for a nascent public company.
And the consequence was, well, predictable but massive in scale. A brutal streamlining of operations.
Yeah. By 2003, Agilent had cut 18,500 positions.
Wow.
This wasn't trimming the fat for efficiency. This was corporate triage. The market was forcing Agilent's hand, demanding profitability over market breadth.
Yeah.
And they had to respond.
And that economic crisis basically dictated their first, and you could argue their most painful strategic move.
Shedding the legacy healthcare business. This divestiture was the clearest indicator that the company was prioritizing strategic focus over what looked like short-term financial stability.
Let's talk scale here, because I think this is often overlooked. In 2001, Agilent sells its entire healthcare and medical products organization to Philips Medical Systems. This was not a minor adjustment. This was corporate surgery.
It really was. And remember, this division was the second oldest part of the HP empire. It accounted for a massive 60% of the company's total revenue in the year 2000.
60%. Let's just sit with that for a moment. Selling a stable, massive 60% revenue stream, a business that was foundational to HP to chase a smaller, more specialized niche. Isn't that wildly irresponsible in the short term? I mean, how did they manage to sell that decision to shareholders, especially right after a major economic downturn?
It was terrifying financially. There's no other way to put it. You are sacrificing immense, stable cash flow. But the strategic necessity was just overwhelming.
Why? What was the fundamental clash?
The HP Medical Products division operated in a totally different sphere. It sold patient-facing monitoring devices, defibrillators, hospital equipment. It was a high-volume, highly regulated market driven by relationships with hospital administrators.
Okay, a B2B sales model, but focused on healthcare systems.
Right. Meanwhile, the scientific instrument business, the gas chromatographs, the mass spectrometers, that was a high-margin, specialized market driven by relationships with PhD-level researchers and lab managers. The sales cycles, the customer support, the R&D focus, everything was different.
So the culture and the sales cycles clashed fundamentally.
Precisely. By selling that medical unit, which was valued at around $11 billion at the time,
11 billion.
by selling that, Agilent sent an unmistakable signal. They said, we are getting out of commodity-driven, high-volume patient care, and we are focusing purely on the specialized, high-margin, intellectual property-intensive segment of research and analytical chemistry. It allowed them to concentrate all their engineering and sales resources onto a single customer type, the lab scientist.
This $11 billion exit, though, it was really just the dress rehearsal for the ultimate corporate simplification, wasn't it?
It was.
The next step was the systematic surgical removal of their entire electronics backbone, and that required an even greater level of corporate conviction. That happened primarily in one massive year, 2005.
2005 was the year Agilent cemented its destiny. They moved decisively away from electronics manufacturing. They had proven they could survive shrinking the company, and now they applied that strategy ruthlessly to the last remaining HP legacy businesses.
First up was the semiconductor ICs business, the actual chip-making part of the company.
Right. That unit was sold to the private equity giants Kohlberg, Kravis Roberts, and Silver Lake Partners for $2.66 billion. This single transaction meant the termination of 1,300 employees and immediately resulted in the creation of a new private company.
And that new company was named Agilent Technologies. This is essential context because Agilent wasn't some minor footnote in business history.
Not at all. Agilent later grew, went public, and then, in a massive deal in 2016, it purchased Broadcom Corporation and took on the name Broadcom Limited.
So just to be clear for everyone listening, Agilent is literally the ancestor of one of today's largest, most important global semiconductor giants.
That's right. They consciously chose to discard this entire lineage. A multi-billion-dollar business that would become a behemoth all so they could focus on selling chromatographs and lab consumables. That is the definition of singular focus.
It's proof that strategic clarity sometimes requires you to discard future multi-billion-dollar possibilities if they dilute your core mission, but they weren't even done in 2005.
No, not even close. They also sold their 47% stake in the LED manufacturer Lumileds to Philips for $1 billion.
And Lumileds, just like the medical products group, was an ancient piece of the HP framework. It was originally its optoelectronics division.
Another significant chunk of electronic manufacturing gone.
And the third major divestiture of 2005 was the semiconductor test business. So this is the equipment used to test chips before they're sold, focusing on system-on-chip and memory test market areas.
Right, and instead of selling it outright, Agilent spun this out entirely into a new public company called Verigy.
Why do that instead of just selling it?
Well, the strategic choice to spin off Verigy as a pure playtest company was interesting. It allowed them to maintain some market exposure for their shareholders, but it removed the management overhead and the resource drain from Agilent's core analytical instrument strategy. It was a cleaner break.
So this comprehensive purge, selling the ICs, selling the LEDs, spinning off the test equipment, it shows a level of corporate simplification you rarely see.
You really don't. The mission of the 2000s was crystal clear.
Yeah.
Extract value from non-core assets and use the resulting capital to strengthen the only group left standing, analytical measurement.
So if we look back at that entire decade, what started as a multi-market giant, a baby HP really, spread across medical, components, and measurement, had rapidly reorganized.
It had sold 60% of its revenue base, divested its entire chip-making operation, and jettisoned its electronic testing unit. They achieved true agility, but only by brutally sacrificing billions in legacy revenue.
The outcome then was a company positioned for quality of growth over sheer quantity of revenue.
Exactly. They made a conscious decision. They decided to operate in a high-margin, specialized niche, the analytical laboratory, where expertise in complex IP create massive barriers to entry. They chose that over competing in the cyclical, volatile commodity electronics markets, where they were always fighting giants like Intel or Samsung. They had found their beachhead.
As we transition into the 2010s, the narrative really shifts, doesn't it? It goes from cutting and survival to targeted building and optimization.
That's a great way to put it. The great divestitures are largely concluded, and Agilent begins this focus phase of acquisitions. They're designed to cement life sciences as the core identity before the final definitive corporate separation.
This is the era where they put their money where their strategic focus was. They started targeting these specialized technology firms that fit perfectly into the burgeoning fields of genomics and clinical diagnostics.
Right. For instance, in 2011, they acquired Hewlett-Genomics. It was a Swedish company involved in next-generation sequencing technology development.
And that's a direct signal, right? They're looking beyond traditional chemical analysis and moving squarely into complex molecular biology.
It's a huge signal. It shows an understanding that the laboratory of the future would be dominated by genomics and cell analysis. But the most significant move of this period, a financial commitment that truly dwarfed the original IPO out, was the agreement in May 2012.
The Ducko acquisition.
The agreement to buy the Danish cancer diagnostics company Ducko for $2.2 billion.
$2.2 billion. That is an immense investment. So tell us, why was Ducko so important to their strategy? What did it give them?
Ducko wasn't just an add-on. It was the foundation for their entire diagnostics and genomics group. Ducko specializes in cancer diagnostics, specifically antibodies and reagents used in pathology and immunohistochemistry.
So analyzing tissue samples,
That's
biopsies.
Exactly. This acquisition significantly expanded Agilent's presence deep into the high-growth, high-margin clinical diagnostics industry. It gave them a direct link into patient care through biopsy analysis. It provided the necessary scale and credibility to be a major player in the clinical world, not just the research lab.
So they were building this new, robust core business model, life sciences and diagnostics, using the capital they generated from selling off all those other pieces. And once that new identity was strong enough, they were ready for the final act of separation. In September 2013, Agilent announced the decision to separate into two publicly traded companies.
This was the last great corporate divorce. They needed to shed the final, largest remnant of the old HP measurement world to achieve complete strategic purity.
And that final remnant was the electronic measurement business. It was spun off into a new entity named Keysight Technologies. The formal separation was completed on November 1st, 2014.
And this is so crucial for the listener. Keysight is a massive, successful company today. It specializes in electronic test equipment, the very foundation of the original Hewlett-Packard. Agilent gave birth to yet another global giant they didn't want to be.
It's incredible, and this time Agilent retained the name. The company we're discussing today focused entirely on the three interconnected areas they had been building toward for a decade.
Life sciences, diagnostics, and applied markets. Their transition was finally complete.
It wasn't just Keysight that was jettisoned in that period, though. We also saw some smaller but highly strategic cuts as part of this consolidation. In October 2014, they announced they were exiting the nuclear magnetic resonance business, NMR.
That detail is so fascinating because on the surface, NMR is highly specialized, high-tech analytical science, the kind of thing you'd think Agilent would keep.
Right, it seems to fit.
It seems to. However, NMR instruments require massive investment and service infrastructure. They often serve a very niche academic market. The strategic thinking here was just crystal clear. If a technology, even a highly complex one, doesn't cleanly fit into the high-growth, high-margin, increasingly clinical life sciences and diagnostic strategy, it has to be cut loose.
It just proves the rigor of their prioritization. No sacred cows.
None at all.
So what does this final split ultimately symbolize for their corporate strategy?
It means they achieved capital focus. That's the key takeaway. They could now deploy every single dollar of R&D and acquisition capital exclusively into the highest growth fields of medical research and analytical chemistry. They had moved entirely out of the cyclical, lower margin electronics testing world.
It's just They took this sprawling conglomerate, performed a decade of corporate surgery, and by 2014, they had a clean, focused capital structure ready to go out and dominate a specialized high-tech niche.
Their ability to shrink to grow and to define their boundaries so clearly, it makes this a textbook case in corporate strategy.
The insight here is really profound, I think. Agilent didn't just stumble into the life sciences boom. They deliberately sold off the businesses that were paying the bills in the short term, like medical devices, and then strategically spun off the businesses that provided massive scale electronics, all to position themselves perfectly for the molecular revolution in biology.
Once Agilent achieved that clean identity, post-Keysight split, they immediately transitioned into what we can only describe as an acquisition engine.
A machine.
Truly, since 2015, they have pursued rapid growth, not just through internal R&D, but through systematic, targeted, high-value acquisitions. And they were designed to build an end-to-end workflow solution for the lab scientist.
This isn't random buying. It's not just growth for growth's sake. It's a classic ecosystem strategy aimed at filling every possible gap in the lab workflow.
Exactly. They wanted to sell the primary instrument, the specialized consumables, the high-tech assays, and the software to manage it all, the whole package.
So let's start with cell analysis technology. This became a huge focus area for them.
A huge focus. The goal here is understanding how living cells function and respond to stimuli, which is critical for drug discovery.
Sure.
In 2015, they acquired Seahorse Bioscience for $235 million.
And what did Seahorse bring into the portfolio?
It brought in crucial metabolic cell analysis capabilities. So instead of just analyzing chemicals, they could now analyze how living cells use energy. It was a major step.
The Seahorse acquisition was so significant because it moved Agilent directly from analyzing, dead samples in a vial to analyzing living functional systems.
And then they doubled down on this functional cell analysis focus. In 2018, they bought ACAA Biosciences for $250 million. And Luxcell Biosciences in the same year.
What did those add?
They deepened their ability to analyze cells in real time, observing processes like oxygen consumption and acidification, the actual fuel use of a cell. This capability is paramount in cancer research and immunology, where understanding these metabolic shifts is key to developing new therapies.
But the capstone acquisition in this segment was the massive purchase of biotech instruments in 2019 for a staggering $1.165 billion.
A huge deal.
So biotech is renowned for its high-quality life science instrumentation. They specialize in automated liquid handling and, critically, microplate readers.
And the biotech deal instantly gave Agilent a huge footprint on the actual lab bench. Microplate readers are ubiquitous. They are in every high-throughput biology lab in the world. This acquisition expanded their market share dramatically in core life science instrumentation.
It moved them beyond their traditional strength in expensive analytical equipment like mass spectrometers.
Right. It moved them into dominating the daily routine work of the researcher. It was a clear power move to create a dominant platform provider.
Okay, so now let's shift to diagnostics and genomics. The clinical side of the business built on that Deco foundation. They continued to invest heavily here, recognizing the explosive growth potential of genetic information.
They did. In 2016, they acquired Multiplicom NV. It was a leading European diagnostics company specializing in state-of-the-art genetic testing technology and products.
And what was their focus?
They were particularly focused on congenital disorders and prenatal screening. This cemented Agilent's move into the clinical application of genomics, complementing the research genomics they had started with Halo.
They also acquired LaserGen Inc. in 2018, which reinforced their foundational technology stack in the genomics space. They were ensuring they had proprietary technology that is indispensable to the next-generation sequencing workflow.
And to give the listener some context here, let's talk about why these technologies matter so much. The current boom in personalized medicine is completely reliant on next-generation sequencing, or NGS. Agilent realized that the challenge wasn't just sequencing the entire genome, it was efficiently finding the specific, relevant genes within it. This is where their role as a pioneer in target enrichment comes in.
Target enrichment is essentially finding the needle in the genomic haystack. When you're looking for specific cancer mutations, you don't need to sequence all 3 billion base pairs of the human genome. It's just too expensive and time-consuming.
Right. And target enrichment technology, which Agilent specializes in, allows researchers to selectively capture only the regions of interest. It drastically speeds up the process and lowers the cost. This makes them a critical partner in the boom of modern genomic research.
Okay, so let's move to the chemical and analytical tools category. Their core strength, inherited all the way from 1965. They focused acquisitions here on optimizing and diversifying this segment.
Yeah, in 2016, they bought Cobalt Light Systems for about 40 million pounds. This brought in advanced Raman spectroscopy instruments.
And what's that used for?
Raman spectroscopy is used for rapid, non-destructive chemical identification. It's highly relevant for quality control, like in pharmaceuticals, and for security screening, like at airports.
And in 2018, we saw a flurry of activity aimed at both instruments and the high-margin consumables needed to run them. They acquired Ultra Scientific, which provides crucial chemical standards and reference materials.
The acquisition of Ultra Scientific shows that holistic strategy at work. It's a classic razor and blade business model. You sell the expensive machine, the razor, but you ensure recurring high-margin revenue by selling the specialized high-quality standards and consumables, the blades that are needed to make the machine work accurately.
It stabilizes their revenue streams.
Massively.
They also acquired Advanced Analytical Technologies, or AATI, for $250 million. This strengthened their expertise in capillary electrophoresis-based molecules.
And for anyone curious, capillary electrophoresis is a high-resolution separation technique. It's vital for analyzing complex biomolecules like DNA fragments and proteins with incredible precision. So it's another key tool for genomics and proteomics.
And finally, they recognize that a modern, efficient lab is fundamentally a digital entity.
You can't ignore the software. 2018, they bought Genome for digital laboratory management. This acquisition was a huge step into the software side of efficiency, offering platforms that streamline data handling, instrument scheduling, and resource allocation. They also acquired Prozyme, Inc., a key producer of glycan reagents, another specialized consumable.
This just shows the ruthless completeness of their strategy. They started with the core analytical instruments, the GCMS. They added specialized cell analysis with Biotech and Seahorse. They built a clinical diagnostics unit with Daco, and then they filled all the gaps with consumables, high-resolution separation tools, and the digital platform to manage it all.
This systematic approach has resulted in a really comprehensive, current, core product portfolio. Agilent now serves the entire spectrum: analytical laboratories, clinical markets, and routine diagnostics.
Let's just ground this by listing some of their key platforms today. They dominate in gas and liquid chromatography. Those are the foundational tools used globally in environmental testing, quality control, food safety, toxicology.
Everywhere. They're immense in mass spectrometry and spectroscopy. And on the biological side, they offer microarrays, FISH probes, which are DNA probes used to literally tag and visualize specific genetic material under a microscope, and the essential target enrichment technology we just talked about.
They even sell vacuum technologies, which just demonstrates that they provide the entire technical infrastructure necessary for a modern lab environment, from the big machine to the smallest pump.
It's not just a vendor relationship anymore. They invest heavily in R&D, both internally and through strategic collaborations with leading universities. They are positioning themselves not just as a seller of equipment, but as a technological leader, co-developing the next generation of knowledge in life sciences and chemical analysis. They are driving the research that they will later profit from.
So stepping back, let's synthesize the company's current status and look toward the future based on this highly focused entity they have become since 2014. The structure they settled into is a perfect reflection of their strategic focus.
Yeah, their current organization is built around three key operational pillars. The first is the Life Sciences and Applied Markets Group, or LSAG. This deals with their core instrumentation, the chromatographs, spectrometers, the biotech instruments. It's the hardware for research.
The second is the Diagnostics and Genomics Group, DGG, which handles the clinical and genetic testing products. This is largely built out through the Daco and Multiplicom acquisitions. It's the patient-facing side of the business.
And the third, the Agilent CrossLab Group, is arguably the most strategically important pillar for their future stability and profitability. This group encapsulates their entire service and support strategy.
So not just fixing the machines.
No, everything. Enterprise asset management, service contracts, software maintenance. This is the realization that in modern science, the service contract and the software are often more stable and more profitable than the physical hardware itself.
So Agilent wants to sell the razor and the blades, and CrossLab is that high-margin blade division.
Precisely.
And the success of this decades-long streamlining process is reflected so clearly in their 2024 financial snapshot. The aggressive cuts and focused acquisitions were highly effective.
They reported $6.51 billion in revenue and a really strong operating income of $1.49 billion. They maintain total assets of $11.8 billion and employ about 17,900 people globally. These are the numbers of a highly successful, focused leader dominating a niche market.
It is the financial proof that the strategy worked. By exiting the volatile commodity markets of electronics and shedding the lower-margin legacy medical business, they created a high-margin, specialized revenue stream that commands strong profits.
We should also note the recent leadership transition. Padraig McDonnell succeeded Mike McMullen as CEO on May 1st, 2024. And that signals a new chapter, one focused on digital integration and therapeutic expansion.
That digital strategy is crucial. Lab efficiency is increasingly defined by software and connectivity. Agilent is absolutely focused on integrating their physical instruments with digital tools to improve lab workflow, efficiency, and productivity.
It's about leveraging the connectivity of all their instruments to optimize laboratory performance, reduce errors, and minimize downtime. A prime example of this commitment came in 2020 with the introduction of CrossLab Virtual Assist.
Which is a mobile app.
It's a mobile app, yeah, but one specifically designed to facilitate high-quality remote technical support.
And that minimizes the agony of waiting for a technician to travel to a lab in some remote location, right? For a complex, high-stakes research environment, that immediate, targeted assistance to complex instrument issues delivered digitally is absolutely crucial for maintaining the research timeline.
And tying into modern corporate responsibility, their digital advancements also directly impact sustainability. CrossLab Connect, for example, helps improve lab optimization by enabling more efficient utilization of instruments,
How so?
by running them only when necessary at optimal loads. This directly lowers energy consumption, so it connects their tech strategy directly to the green initiatives that are increasingly important for major universities and pharmaceutical companies.
Finally, we have to look at where they are placing their biggest, most capital-intensive future bets. Historically, Agilent has been about analysis and diagnostics.
Right.
But in early 2023, the company announced a massive $725 million expansion of its nucleic acid-based therapeutics manufacturing facility in Frederick, Colorado.
That is an immense commitment, and it places Agilent squarely into the high-growth sector of oligonucleotide manufacturing.
What are those exactly?
Oligonucleotides are the key building blocks for next-generation therapies, things like mRNA vaccines and gene silencing drugs. This demonstrates a strategic shift toward manufacturing components for the future of medicine. They're moving beyond simply analyzing DNA and proteins to enabling the actual creation of advanced therapies.
So this investment signals that Agilent is moving up the value chain into biopharma manufacturing, support a high-stakes, high-reward sector.
It suggests that the instruments they sell today are fueling the research that requires the manufacturing capacity they are building tomorrow. They're creating a full-circle synergy.
It's the logical, ultimate endpoint of the journey, isn't it?
It really is. They started by analyzing chemicals. They evolved to analyzing DNA in cells. Now, they are enabling the scaled production of the therapeutic molecules that are defined by that analysis. They are positioning themselves to be indispensable not just for discovery, but for manufacturing the cure.
We've covered a massive amount of corporate history today, tracking a story of relentless, focused corporate surgery. So let's quickly review the core strategic takeaways from Agilent's evolution.
Well, we tracked Agilent's journey from being this collection of diverse, non-computing business units inside HP to becoming a highly focused, high-tech instrument and services specialist.
Right.
The key was a rigorous, nearly two-decade process of strategic divestiture. It started with that $11 billion medical revenue sale, followed by shedding massive electronics assets like Avago, which became Broadcom, and finally separating Keysight Technologies.
And that divestiture wasn't a failure, it was a success of strategic intent. It was followed by an aggressive, targeted acquisition phase, highlighted by those huge defining deals, like the $2.2 billion purchase of Dako for clinical diagnostics.
And the $1.165 billion acquisition of biotech for lab instrumentation. These moves allowed them to completely dominate the high-margin lab technology ecosystem.
So if we connect all the dots, the company that started with gas chromatographs back in 1965, a basic piece of analytical chemistry equipment, is now enabling target enrichment for next-generation sequencing, sophisticated cell analysis, and manufacturing nucleic acid-based therapeutics.
It's the perfect illustration of corporate evolution guided by strategic focus. An almost ruthless ability to cut loose any business, no matter how profitable, that doesn't fit the singular core vision.
So we leave you with one final provocative thought to consider, circling back to the sheer financial scale of their strategic moves. Think about how Agilent's biggest external moves transition from spinning off capital with that record $2.1 billion IPO in 1999 to aggressively spending capital strategically.
Like the $2.2 billion on Daco and the $1.165 billion on biotech to buy their way into dominance.
And now they're committing $725 million to nucleic acid therapeutics manufacturing. This signals a new stage, manufacturing enablement. So the question is, what kind of high-value biopharma-enabling acquisitions would define their next 5 years?
Maybe something in supply chain control, or specialized purification technologies, or even advanced robotics for manufacturing.
As Agilent solidifies its position as an essential partner in the therapeutic manufacturing world, what's next? That's something to think about until the next deep dive.